Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. As always, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat box, and we'll try to get those as we go along. My name is Jeff Shorgen. I'm in Wabash County, Indiana, as the extension agent in that county. I've got a little bit of background with weeds and different things in turf and landscape. So we're going to talk about invasive plant species today. And as far as invasives go, there are a lot of other things besides plants that can be invasive in our environment. So just at the beginning of this, we'll talk about, what is an invasive species? Why are they considered that way? Maybe some differences between a weed and an invasive species. This is a great definition. A non-native organism that cause or likely to cause harm to the ecosystem, commerce, or human health. And so we see the caterpillar, so an insect at the bottom, we see the feral hogs up at the top, and then we've got this Norway maple here that would be a plant. We're going to focus on the plants today. When I was part of, there's a program at a state park near me, I had some folks from the DNR talking about the different species they had in their park that we were going to help clear away. And they kept repeating just the quick phrase. It was, an invasive species is something that does not contribute to the native environment. It's basically a waste of space that's going to cost a lot of money to pull out of there. It's not going to contribute to food for the native fauna. And again, it just kind of gets in the way. So native species versus exotic. We've got a few bullet points here. A native species is something present in North America before European settlement. It can be native to different parts of the country, but have been moved. So you're thinking East Coast versus West Coast. And that little bit about the European settlement, when humans started moving rapidly, they started introducing seeds and animals, different organisms, different areas that they might not have gotten to only after, thousands of years. So with the increase in transportation and travel, exploration, that really introduced this native versus exotic distinction, because things that are exotic or things that are new tend to stick out like a sore thumb. The exotic, here we've got 3 bullet points, not present before European settlement. Not all of them are invasive. So that's a good point to sort of meditate on, is different plants, for instance, that were brought over by the pioneers. I can think of buckhorn plantain, broadleaf plantain. The Native Americans called that pioneer's foot. And they called it that because anywhere the pioneers landed or were walking around, that weed would show up, and the Native Americans didn't really have an idea of what to do with that or what it was good for. So where it was not native, it was exotic at the time, and now it's just a common lawn weed that we can get rid of pretty easily. Also, non-native, alien, or introduced. So, how did they get here? So here we have kudzu. That's kind of one of the poster childs for invasives. It was introduced for conservation with soil erosion and wildlife habitat. So if someone came with a plant organism and said, hey, this is going to be great for soil erosion and wildlife habitat, it might be something that works well for a time, but then if it's unchecked, it will spread. Kudzu being more in the southern region. When I think of soil erosion, a way to prevent that, we think of honeysuckle, where I'm at in my location, and that's the one you see a lot along the wood lines. But then there are times where it's accidental, truly something that was accidental. It wasn't planned, but after a time it got established. And then once those populations get high enough, they can become a real issue. And then ornamental escapes. This is one where, trends with ornamental plants come and go. Sometimes those plants are really able to survive well in an environment, but if they're brought from another area, who knows if those seeds are going to be viable, if they're going to have a large number of seeds, if those are going to be an issue in, whether in crops, they spread into crop areas or other landscapes. So just a couple different ways that things happen. There's not a typically someone behind the curtain who's going to say, hey, let's introduce this and make it an issue here in the next 50 years. And then here we have a comment from the USDA from 1972, that although some old naturalized thickets have been reported, no places are known where autumn olive is considered a pest, which we know now autumn olive is one of those things that it is an invasive, and we want to kind of prevent any more spread than we already have. So what makes an invasive species successful? High reproductive capacity. So we're looking at whether it's seed production, whether they're able to regenerate from root cuttings, the seed dispersal, whether that be from birds or wind or water. Competitive advantage. This is something where we'll see something that maybe grows a little earlier in the year or possibly a little later in the year. It grows quicker at a younger stage, so it can outcompete. Tolerant of a variety of growing conditions. This is just where if we might have a similar climate to where that invasive is coming from, that really opens the door to have them get a foothold in. Allelopathy, this is the chemical warfare. There are some different species, organisms that will put off chemicals through their roots, and what that does is that whether by sterilizing the soil or by affecting roots of their neighbors, they'll be able to control other plants around them. Lack of natural enemies or controls. So natural enemies, when we're talking about plants, you know, you're thinking of, there's not really a whole lot other than what animals might prey on or control. And then disturbances or change in the local ecosystem, creating an invadable space. And I like to turn towards, you know, railroads, highways, different places that are opened up where you have the middle of a woods being cleared out to where there is exposed sunlight. So maybe some of these more exotic species come through, they take advantage of that sunlight, they grow quicker than the native species, and then they get their foot kind of in the door. All right, this is one of my favorite slides. This is a good graph that just shows the timeline or what we can expect from an exotic species that has the potential to become invasive. So here on the left, we have acres infested, and as we go further up, it increases. We have the plant is absent, and then we have an introduction point. You know, whether that be on the pallet of some shipping thing, maybe something was planted on purpose, something escaped from a flower bed. Either way, just the plant was introduced to the environment. The eradication during this is simple. The problem is a lot of times we don't see those issues while the eradication is simple on account of, one, the populations aren't great enough, so visually we don't see them. There aren't a large enough numbers where people are scouting for those, and so reduction of visual sort of cues to see what's going on. So it may not even look like it is an invasive species at this time. And then we get scattered locations, which is when detection will occur. Eradication is feasible. So we're looking at a cost that's pretty manageable. You know, if you can take out a few populations to get the numbers down, and then, you know, sort of understand what your target is and how it grows in the environment and what it does, then you can usually get some backing, you know, to help out with the eradication. And then you get public awareness typically begins. This is where you get the different calls coming in, issues about a plant that, you know, is maybe mature, putting on a lot of seeds. You see a lot of new growth, new plants coming up. And it's there in yellow, it says eradication is unlikely, intense effort required. And it's that intense effort that usually is one of the roadblocks, because sure, we could take out all the honeysuckle in the state, but that's going to take hundreds, if not thousands of man hours, millions of dollars. And so it has to be a more of a small, you know, sort of, they say the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So that's just where, if you get a detection, that's where you got to start getting the programs in, getting the populations down, because it's not going to happen overnight. And then we have the last bit where it's local control and management only, and at or near biological potential. So they've kind of, that plant has found where it can grow well, and creates a population that's going to be really hard to get rid of. So early detection is what we want to be aware of. You know, keep an eye on new plants that are coming up. If you didn't put it there, it might be something that, hey, let's take a look at this and what is it, and figure out what's going on. Why should I care? So this outcompetes native species is the big one, because once you start outcompeting those native plants and reducing habitat, you just get an ecosystem that's not as rich as it can be. The increased cost of eradicating that, and then increase in disease. So whenever you get new plants coming in, typically they might have some hosts, they're hosts to some other diseases that we might not see in the area. So just keeping those things in check is always a good idea. Threat of invasive species. So worldwide problem, this is just an example of an insect, the soybean aphids. Number 2, threat to the environment, affecting most ecosystems. Estimated cost. So this $12 trillion number, that's just over time. I hope I'm reading that number right. They are a cost to the areas. They just, because they can grow so well and spread so easily, a lot of times they do have an impact in an economical sense. So in Indiana, we had problems with aquatic invasive species, harming recreation, insects and disease killing shade trees. We had the mosquitoes, and then the cost of Indiana, and that cost Indiana over $5 million a year. So they have different organizations like the Indiana Invasive Plant Advisory Committee. So there are organizations that are trying to reduce the amount of impact that these invasives can have. And here's just an example of, I believe this is the ash borer issue, where in June 2006 versus August 2009. But then they do have different data points, where it was found, where it's spreading to. And again, that's kind of the first step in finding out if you have an invasive species is where is this and where is it spreading to. Oh, and then this is the environmental damage of hydria. Threat to human health, and Indiana caused 5.8 million per year. And then we're talking about wildlife. So native plants, typically the animals we have here, they're going to host insects and different things for food as wildlife. So once you kind of get that in balance of your food system, your food webs, the food chain, you're going to start disturbing native species, and then you get into the issue of environmental stability and how long that can work. So being vigilant is a big part of that, keeping those food webs in place. And then we'll just touch in diseases. You know, invasive shrubs improve tick habitat. Well, if you have more Japanese barberry, you have more ticks, then you have an increase in Lyme disease. So it's just kind of a snowball effect to where, you know, keep this plant out of here, keep the tick population down, and you kind of reverse some of those problems on multiple levels. All right, so I'm just going to go into some broad types of invasive species. Like I said, we'll focus mostly on plants, but garlic mustard is a big one you'll see at the sort of on the canopy floor in different wooded areas. And then we've got, you know, as a water or different invasives in the aquatic sphere, you'd have the mute swan, Asian carp, that's been a big one recently. Eurasian water milfoil. This is one that I've seen quite a bit during this lake season. Pretty big issue in terms of lake health, pond health. And then you've got the different bugs, which we won't talk too much about those. And then the feral hogs, that's another one that's come up quite a bit in the past 10, 15 years as a mammal that's more destructive in the southern parts of the states. Bacteria, fungi, viruses. We might have talked a little bit about viruses in the past with the news, but because I like plants, we're going to stick with the different plant species because that's what I know best for my controls. So, plant control. This top bullet point is probably one of the hardest pills to swallow, but it's also one of the most honest. expect 3 to 5 years to eradicate an infestation. So it's not something that's going to be done in a year or 6 months. It's going to take 3 to 5. And then the second bullet point, the expect reinfestation, because a lot of times you can't get things under control in one season. There's always that option where you get a reinfestation or regrowth, a flush of growth. So you have to take a lot of precautions to make sure that you're not spreading it while you're trying to eradicate it. And that goes into the equipment sanitation. Cleaning is a must to prevent moving seeds around and aided spread of these plants. Working on some golf courses, a lot of times with their putting greens, they have an issue with annual bluegrass. Annual bluegrass is a grass species that can produce seeds when it's mowed very low. So when you mow one green and it's a dewy morning, and you've got those mowers out there and that water sticks to the blade gets the seeds stuck to them. Well, if you don't clean off your different mower blades after usage, you're going to have an opportunity to spread that seed not only to your different golf greens, but if you're moving that lawnmower, that greens mower from different golf courses, you have the potential to spread that to different golf courses. So keeping equipment clean, that's a big one. And that would maybe even mean shearing when you're doing shears and getting seeds on those. And then learning how to recognize new species and act quickly to control them. Make sure I got everything in there. Control techniques, cut stumps. You can apply herbicides to basal bark, foliar treatments. So that would be using a chemical, which is the gentleman in the bottom here. You can spot spray, which is, hitting the individual plants, or broadcast, which is hitting a big swath of an area. Physical removing, you can do mowing or pulling. Those are better if you have, the pulling is better if you have a volunteer crew who you can get a certain area sort of worked on at one time. But that's usually more applicable if you have a lot of people doing it. Mowing, the right equipment for the right job, where they're using the Bobcat here with a brush cutter. I've seen that work pretty well. But you always got to be careful with that mowing, because a lot of these plants can regenerate from the rootstock. All right, so cut stump treatment. So this is used on woody invasive plants regardless of size. So it's pretty simple. Cut down the woody plant and then treat the cut surface with a concentrated systemic herbicide to prevent sprouting. So sprouting can be, think of the Hydra, Greek mythology. You cut off one head and 3 more sprout out. If you don't use that systemic herbicide, you're going to get those 3 heads popping out where there was just one tree before. So you got the gentleman here, probably has a metal blade on, looks like he's going after the honeysuckle there. And then follow back with your small bottle of spray. One thing that I have kind of seen is when you're ever doing this cut stump procedure, you don't need a giant backpack sprayer. If you can get, it looks kind of like a Windex bottle, and you can get a high concentrate herbicide, that works better. One, because you're not carrying a lot of chemical around, but also it's manageable in terms of where you want to spray that. When he sprays that at the ground level, he's going to get right on that stump. He's not going to affect too many plants around it. And it just does a real nice job of keeping things concise and clean. And here's a picture of a larger plant that has been cut, and then it's got the blue dye on there. I would suggest the blue dye just because it shows you what has been hit, maybe what's still wet. And I actually did this. This was something they did at the weed wrangle that I was part of at the Salamone Lake. It just kind of helps you know what was hit. And then if that blue dye lasts a little bit longer, the other thing you can do is just kind of look at, well, how good did my treatments work? Should I have sprayed a little bit more? Did that tree die completely? Were we successful? So that's just something nice to keep as an indicator, is that dye. Some other points about cut stump treatments: 50% solution of glyphosate, so half water, half Roundup, or you can do a 17 to 25% solution of triclopyr. This third bullet point is probably the biggest takeaway from this, is treat very soon after cutting a surface, ideally within 10 minutes. And so a lot of times when you cut these plants, if you leave them exposed, they have the ability to scab over. and then you're not going to have as good of infiltration of that herbicide. When I was in college, I was renting a house where they had a south-facing hill that was pretty well populated with honeysuckle. And while I was in horticulture, my buddy was in forestry. And so we actually got paid by our landlord to take out some of those plants or try to get as much honeysuckle out. I had started cutting down the honeysuckle, and then I thought, no, I'm in horticulture. I was the one that was certified for treating the stumps, so I let him cut the stumps down while I treated them as soon as he got those down. So he had to do more of the work by the end of it, and I got kind of the easy job. Treating the entire surface of the small stem. So make sure you get all the area, and then treatment is most effective in mid to late fall. If you folks have heard me talk about weeds and spraying for lawn weeds, I want you to spray for those in the fall, because that's when those weeds are drawing nutrients down to the root. Same thing with these trees, they're drawing their nutrients down to the root for storage. You take advantage of that and try to get more of that herbicide down into that root system to make sure that they don't grow back. And then basal bark treatments, what's where the herbicide is applied directly to the bark or the stem without cutting. But you do have to use an oil-based mixture, because these trees or plants do have that bark layer, and you want to get that herbicide through all of that. So you see down here at the bottom, the triclopyr 17 to 25% in an oil with a dye. And then making sure you cover all the sides, and then from the ground to 12 inches high, you can go a little bit higher than that. But as we'll see in this picture, he's got the dye, he's maybe going a little bit higher, maybe knee level. But that's another good way to work. If it's a bigger tree, if you don't have the equipment to maybe cut down a tree that size, to use that basal bark treatment. And then this is used on smaller stem woody plants, quick and easy. It does use more herbicide than cut stumping. And then it leaves plants standing, so you don't have to worry about cutting down that material or moving it, and they'll just kind of leave it to its own devices. And then foliar treatment is useful for woody and herbaceous invasive plants. Plants typically need to be photosynthetically active. So if you're spraying once the leaves are knocked down for the fall, not the best time. You need to use a lower rate of herbicide, because you do have the potential for non-target impacts. If you've got plants that are growing shoulder height and you're going out there with a spray gun, it would not be the best practice to spray a herbicide out sort of at eye level as opposed to spraying down, just because there's a risk of the non-target control of plants that maybe you didn't want to hit. So this is good if you have a large area of things with very little else that you don't necessarily worry about in terms of controlling it. So the foliar treatment is an option. There are a variety of herbicides that can be used. You just have to make sure you know your target species. You do need to get as much of the leaf covered as possible, but don't spray to the point of runoff. This just means that you don't want to have excess dripping onto new seedlings underneath that are maybe plants you actually want to keep around. And also just, again, keeping that non-target injury to a minimum. So here we have the backpack sprayer. I would like to see someone wear gloves when they do this, but maybe it's a low rate of herbicide and they're kind of hitting a bit lower. So maybe they're going after the young plants. And this will work better with smaller areas and then with light infestations. All right, and then here we have a sprayer on the back of a gator or four-wheeler type thing. With foliar treatments, so typical application, as opposed to 50% glyphosate, you have a 3% glyphosate as part of the mixture, and then 2 to 4% triclopyr. This is always got to kind of throw the, label is the law, check the labels in the literature for more specific rates and different herbicide options. In terms of a cultural bit of information, young plants are more susceptible and can be controlled using a lower range of rates. and then it tends to work better later in the season for woody plants. So just think smaller plants, lower doses, and they do need to be actively growing. So these plants here, looks like they're getting a little yellow. Berries are mature, might be, getting on in the fall. Looks like in the background you got most of the leaves falling off. So this might not be the best time to hit them because you want those leaves to be actively growing. Mechanical removal, mowing and cutting will not kill it on its own. Like I said, some of these plants, if you just mow off the top of it, it's able to have enough sugar stored that it will regenerate. It's usually the mechanical removal is going to be the first part of chemical control. So if you're mowing, again, hit it with a mower and then have someone come right behind you and dab it with that herbicide. And then pulling roots, and then easier on small plants. That's kind of a given. You see the gentleman here has his tool there. It looks like, again, he's going for that honeysuckle. And if he can get a good chunk of those roots out of there, that's going to give you a better chance to get complete control for that invasive. All right, treatment summary. There are many options available for control. The best option depends on the specific conditions at the site and the target of the invasive species. Treatments can be combined, whether that's cut, stump, and the desired result will be to get rid of those invasive species. And then that bottom point, always check label information for specifics. If anytime you breach a label instruction, that's on the person spraying it, and at that point can't really do a lot of help with legal issues. So follow that label. All right. So Indiana terrestrial plant rule. This is just listed plant species will be illegal to sell, trade, transport after April 2020. And we just have, there are different, I'm not going to go through these, but they do have different species here that you wouldn't be able to sell, say, for landscaping or for soil erosion or trade. So, and transport. So these are things that by law, you're not supposed to spread, mostly because they are a noxious introduction. They become a noxious weed when they're introduced to the environment. So we're going to break these into invasive shrubs, trees, and then I think there are a few other plants that we were looking at. Shrubs are multi-stem perennial woody plants. And then there's some of the bigger invasive species that we see in Indiana and the region. So Asian bush honeysuckle, this one you've heard me talk about a couple times. It's got multi-stem, 6 to 12 feet tall. There are several species. It stays green late and then edges and understories of roadsides, mostly because that's where they can, I don't want to say infect, but where they can establish well. The biggest threat it has is what it's going to do is it's going to shade out native plants and it decreases wildlife habitat as well as timber value. So this is one where if it's a long route, if it is a long route, I'm sorry, can't get my words out, around long enough, it'll start affecting what can grow and what your wooded area will look like in the future, 50, 20 years down the road. So control, best options would be to mechanical cut, stump, and basal bark and foliar. These ones are kind of easy to see because they will green up earlier in the year, and then they also stay green longer into the fall. So they're kind of easy to spot. And then there's another picture there. And then a lot of them will have these red berries, and it's my understanding that birds will eat these berries and disperse them. So that's a good reproductive advantage they have, is these berries that the birds enjoy and will spread around. And this is a good image to kind of look at, big picture things. You see the trees haven't quite bloomed or started putting on their leaves in the spring, but you see this green sort of haze, anywhere from 0 to 6, 7 feet up there, and that's all that honeysuckle that you're seeing. Multiflora rose. So this is one that you'll see in open areas, pastures, and roadsides. The thicket, when it forms an impenetrable thicket, so you're looking at wildlife habitat destruction, this is one that came from Asia. So it's one of those that, you know, if it does get established, it can be a real pain to get rid of, especially in old pastures and forest edges. It does have the ability to grow in shade, so it's one of those that kind of will grow where it lands, but mechanical control with foliar and basal bark applications. A lot of times you need to get maybe a little extra equipment, whether that be the bobcat mower or the brush mower, because they do have those thorns on them, so they're kind of a nuisance trying to get rid of them. Here's just some more pictures. You can see the thorns there. And it's got some berries as well. And then here you've got sort of the wooded area as they're growing up. Then you got the thickets, which I'm glad these guys are walking through them because I would rather not. Okay, autumn olive, a large shrub up to 20 feet. It does have the ability to fix its own nitrogen, so it's something that was maybe looking for a soil health addition to the different ecosystems. However, it does grow pretty quickly on forest edges and open area. It needs full sunlight, so any fields that are left fallow, and then forest edges, and again, like all the other species, it displaces native species. This one is one of those, though, like if you look at this picture, you can kind of see the tops of the greens, but it does have a really nice silver bottom of the leaf. So this is one that, you know, if I didn't know it was invasive, I'd say, hey, that's a pretty good looking plant. I wouldn't mind putting that, you know, in my yard. But knowing what I know now about how it can spread and be a threat to the native species, you know, I'd probably stick away from that and just not even worry about that. Worry about it in terms of getting it planted on purpose somewhere. Control, mechanical, foliar and cut stump, basal bark, all work with this species. Here you've got the flowers, again, that nice silvery underside of the leaf. But then here you have sort of the thicket where it's kind of shaded out everything. You can see grass along the edge at the bottom of the picture, but as you go further into the thicket of that, you can see that it does a pretty good job of shading everything out. Burning bush. Okay, this one surprised me because I planted burning bush. I won't anymore. It's an ornamental. It has lots of seeds. It does a lot of, or a good job of shading everything out. So the heavy shade prevents native plants and it reduces habitat for species. So this is one where you do see a lot of them. They do look very good in the fall, but a lot of times they can kind of get away from you, like in this picture where I'm sure, you know, maybe there was a bush or two either purposefully planted or one near a house, and that eventually just spread out along this entire edge, which again contributes to that habitat destruction. So mechanical, foliar, cut stump, and basal bark all work to control the burning bush. These are bushes that are in the fall. And then here you have, I mean, they are a nice leaf and they've got that interesting looking stem there. This is the leaf before it turns. Here you have it kind of mid, perhaps late summer, early fall, where the leaves are turning from green to red, all those berries. And then you have sort of the infestation, kind of see it winding through this. Again, shading out a lot of stuff to where maybe new seedlings of our native species wouldn't be as well off in that area. Do we have any questions or anything, or are we doing pretty good? I haven't really checked at the chat box, but are we doing okay there?
So far, so good.
All righty. I was rambling off. Just wanted to make sure that didn't have anything missed. So, okay. The next one is privet. Again, I've planted some of these. It's an ornamental. It's a border hedge. The problem with this is that, again, like all the other ones, it shades out a lot of our native plants. So it's going to grow pretty quickly. Come on. It's got these nice green waxy leaves and sort of a showy white flower. And there's different types of privet. One thing I found is that any of these landscape plants that are kind of familiar, it's usually the older varieties that have the potential to spread and become invasive. So if there's a newer variety of privet or a newer variety of burning bush, perhaps a dwarf variety, I'd want to make sure that if I was ever to plant that, there'd be something on the label that said, you know, the seeds or berries are sterile, will not spread, something like that, because knowing what we know here in 2020, invasive species can really take a hold of things, but if they have tested to make sure it doesn't spread as quickly as, say, some of the old varieties, then some of those newer varieties might be worthwhile looking into. But you know, just to be careful of what we're looking at, being vigilant, because again, some of those older varieties are the ones that cause the issue and not some of the newer cultivars. All right, so a few more pictures of berries there. Again, you got that nice leaf, but then you've got the infestation where, kind of like the honeysuckle, you just kind of see this green haze covering the floor. Japanese barberry, we discussed these with as a tick environment, and any environment that has less ticks works for me. But they're a smaller shrub with many thorns, provides little wildlife food, and then its roots do alter the soil to prevent the growth of native plants. And then control mechanical, you can apply foliar, you can cut stump and basal bark. So those are all options there. Then here you've got the berries in that image, and then barberry, you've got some nice thorns going on there. So if it was a mechanical removal, just be aware that it might be a little issue with making sure you can get through there appropriately, either as a person or with equipment. And here you have sort of the infestation with those red leaves, red berries, again, just sort of taking over the floor of that wooded area. Then we've got the European buckthorn, has sub-opposite leaves, about 2 inches long. Twigs are usually tipped with a dull pointed thorn, and it has blackberries that stay on the branches. This is a very invasive, this is more further north that can handle the cold temperatures. It is a high seed producer, so that means it can spread fairly quickly season to season, and then it outcompetes many of the native plants. So, and then I've got a note here that it can also host soybean aphids. So anywhere that planted soybeans, you might have got them controlled in the field, but there's a possibility that those populations can remain on the buckthorn, so that you might get a reinfestation in your soybeans in subsequent years, because these bushes can hold on to those pests. And that just brings us back to, you know, these invasive species might cause more of a problem than just taking up space. They might play host to some different pests. And then you can mechanically get rid of them, foliar treatment, basal bark cut. So, you know, the treatments are out there. And then there's a picture of the bark. It's got that sort of those rough eyelets going on up and down there. But then also you have the infestation rate pretty high. Then you've got, so here are some native shrub alternatives. Not going to go through all these, but things like black choke cherry, the smooth hydrangea, oak leaf hydrangea, spice bush, nine bark, and then the cinquefoils. So there are options out there. I believe we're recording this one, so if anyone wants this list, I can get that to them. Otherwise, it'll be on our presentation. All right, so now we've got vines, and I'm not going to spend too much time on these. You have Japanese honeysuckle, native to Asia. It was planted for wildlife habitat and erosion prevention. So good intentions, you know, wanted to keep the wildlife habitat up in numbers, wanted to stop erosion, but lo and behold, it did kind of a double take on us, and it covers trees and shrubs and eventually chokes them out. So it's a bigger part of a problem in the southern part of the state. And this is one of those where you get the vines, and it's not so much, I mean, it will shade out the forest floor, but when it's something that can start climbing up trees and affecting larger plants, you really kind of get into the next level of nuisance, of habitat destruction. So a pretty big issue on that. It's spread by birds with their berries. And then see if we got some more pictures here. Yep, there are the berries. And those vines just do a real good job of, taking out different plants, sort of running in and out of areas. And then moving on to Oriental Bittersweet. They've got sort of a glossy leaf there. It's got a reddish orange berry. The vine has a thick gray bark with rounded lenticles, and the vine will twine around the trees. It has fewer fruits at its branches than the American bittersweet, but this one is known as the kudzu of the north. So it's one that really does a good job of growing quickly, choking out native trees, suffocating them is another word. And then birds will spread the seed readily, and the vines will spread pretty quickly as well. And we're looking at, taking over a forest. You can control these mechanically, also with foliar applications, cut stump. Now, this is going to be one, though, if you don't get a handle on it, when you're saying taking over a forest, you're looking at a very large area. So these vines, once again, are very difficult to control, especially when they kind of get out of hand. Got a picture of the berries. There's some mature berries there. The birds enjoy those and will spread them. And here you have some scarring on this tree here. You can just see where that bittersweet wrapped around. Not sure if that tree survived or not, but it does a good job of really affecting those trees that are a lot older than maybe some that you wouldn't think an invasive species could take down. And then here you've got some that are actually going up into the tree, and whatever host tree, this one looks like it maybe has a year left, but then these other trees are completely covered with it. You get sort of this tent draping going on here, so not a good thing to have happen. Mile a minute vine, so as the name implies, it grows pretty quickly, up to 25 feet in a year. They did have a population in Indiana, and then up to 6 inches a day, so it does a really good job of growing. Covers the shrubs and trees, and then the seeds can stay viable in the soil for up to 5 years. So this is one that really don't want to have established and don't want to have seeds going through there. Low mowing prevents seed production, and that's something with knowing your enemy. If you can do something as simple as mowing to get the seed population down, that's going to probably be better to do a program of mowing as opposed to thinking you can go in once or twice a year and spray with herbicides, because you're going to have to keep that up for quite a while. So again, knowing your enemy, and if you can mow down to reduce seed populations, that's one of the better options. And then you have just the landscape that have been taken over by it. Kudzu, perennial vine, climbs on trees. This is something that where I'm at, I don't have that big of an issue, thank goodness, but I'd like to keep it that way. It does, the colder weather can snap vines back, but it has been found near Lake Michigan. So physical treatments like mowing can help control it, but herbicides are often needed because this does grow so quickly. There's a picture of the flower there. And then here it just shows sort of this giant mat of kudzu going along up the hill, probably take out some of this some of the environment there. So habitat destruction, absolutely. And then you've got some alternative vines, different bittersweet, trumpet honeysuckle, but just be careful. Native plants are always good wherever you're getting them from, making sure that it's got that native tag on it. And then invasive trees, we'll go through these pretty quickly. Tree of Heaven, this is one that, when I see it, it's on the edges of the woods, where maybe an agriculture field is hit, or disturbed areas. If they put down a new trail or a road, then that disturbed area with that sun penetrating, if there's any potential for this tree to get going, it's going to. It has lots of seeds and root sprouts, so that's kind of a double-edged sword. It has been planted in urban areas. Control would be mechanical, foliar, or basal bark. The biggest thing is this one is just getting them when they're young. It can take over native habitats very, very quickly. And then it does have that allelopathic chemicals, so it can sort of stunt the growth of plants near it. And then this is one that, because of those root sprouts, you're going to have to take care of many years
Too many basil plants, did we?
into the future. So.
Yeah. Well, until
If we could have everyone mute, that'd be great. Had a little interference there. And then here's a picture of the seed pods. So lots of seeds, and this is just one branch of it. And this is what I'm used to seeing, is you got all these young trees growing pretty quickly, sort of taking over the bottom of the canopy there. And then you got your Bradford or Callery pear. So it was planted as an ornamental. The original varieties were sterile. However, you know, that did eventually was able to grow. Originally, so it wasn't able to cross with other cultivars. But then new cultivars came in, and then they became prolific seed producers. So this is one that if you have any open fields, sort of wetland areas, it can take over pretty quickly. You see that image there with the seeds. I mean, this does have a nice leaf look to it. The tree does look nice, but a lot of times you got to be careful that if you are planting a pear, that it's one that's not invasive. And then here you can just see the line of the different blooms coming up, and how that's sort of taken over that understory. So mechanical, foliar, and basal bark cut, we're seeing kind of a pattern, you know, to each their own. As far as control, they're all pretty similar for these different invasives. Me personally, I prefer the mechanical and then hitting it with chemical, mostly because get those things knocked down, get the sunlight to the native plants, and then you can always go back and sort of check your work. Then here we have some more, you know, seedlings that have sprouted, and so just shows the issue that, you know, at one point, yeah, these weren't an issue, but now they are, seeing as they're able to spread pretty quickly. Norway maple. This is another one that kind of surprised me, the Crimson King, because I have planted some of these. They are good shade trees, but they shade everything else out. So as far as a setting in a woods, because their canopy is so dense, a lot of times they can cause an issue of shading out native plants. Control, you can do hand pulling of young plants. You can do foliar spraying, and then the basal bark and cut stump is always an option. And then you just have a picture of the bark there. Different leaf tips as well. And then the seedlings there where, you know, a tree might have been planted as an ornamental, but those seeds, if they start getting spread into a native wood area, they might cause issues with shading out. And then you have some saplings here in this image. And then here's just a forest again, one of sapling trees, and they're just kind of taking over the under. You don't see much growing here on the understory in the soil. So again, making sure that, you know, we're planting things that don't shade out. That's kind of our big thing, is these invasives do a real good job of shading out those native plants so they can't get established. And then here's some native tree alternatives. Serviceberry is a nice one. American hornbeam, redbud. And then you do have, you know, your red maples and your sugar maples. So there are options out there. And then invasive ground covers. So used in landscaping, a lot of times in shady areas, but like invasives do, they tend to find a way to escape. So common periwinkle or vinca, it usually can escape into woods, and it forms that dense mat. And so what that mat's going to do is going to prevent any of the native plant seeds to get to the soil. And so just keeping those in check and not planting the ones that are known invasives. Vegetative spread, you try to keep that contained. And then if you need to get some mechanical control, or if you can spray an area to knock it down with a herbicide, that can work as well. This was planted as an ornamental. I mean, it does have that nice purple flower. But here we see it in the woods where between the leaves and the ground cover, those seeds are going to have a harder time hitting that soil surface, the native plant seeds. Then you have winter creeper, so it's a woody vine and ground cover. Shade tolerant, so it does really well in the shade. It can well shade out native plants, and then it also has the ability to climb trees and could has the potential to sort of knock those younger saplings down. You can physically remove these. You can also do a cut stump treatments. The foliar treatments, those might not work as well because they have a waxy leaf coating. So if you do think that a herbicide is the best option for you, just make sure you are following the label, but you might have to do subsequent applications because of that protective leaf covering. And here's just a few more pictures. And then you got the berries here. Then we have our different alternative ground covers, things like, what have we got in here? Solomon seal, creeping phlox. So there's other options in there that do well as ground covers. The biggest thing is just making sure those aren't escaping out into the woods if you decide to plant those in a shady area. Other plants, here we have wild mustard taking over the ground here in the wooded area. Poison hemlock. This is an interesting one because it's a biennial. So first year is going to grow vegetatively. And then the second year it's going to grow reproductively. So first year might have a bunch of leaves, as you can see in this image, and then I'll put on this nice, well, it's not nice, these flowers here. And this is one where every once in a while, since I'm in Wabash, they have a really nice river walk. Around June 1st into July, these guys really started to show up. They were sprouting pretty quickly. It is toxic to animals and humans. You would want to pull out the plants. Foliar treatments and rosette before flowering is a big one. The other thing that I've heard about this, mowing them down. If you can get the area mown down before they set seed, that's a good way to get rid of them if you don't want to use herbicides. Just be careful. You know, it is poison hemlock, so there is the potential for some irritation. And if I had this in my property, you know, I'd want to get rid of it because I don't want the off chance that, you know, livestock would get at it or the kids would start messing with it. So just try to keep that in check. Here we've got an image you can see on both sides. The white flowers there, got a trail going through. This is one I took on the river walk back in the late spring, early summer. I'm going to go ahead and just real quickly, purple loosestrife, wetlands and ditches, crowds out native plants, reduces wildlife habitat, herbicides can work. This is one though that just does a good job of taking over the plants. Here we see the guys kind of lost in a big stand of that purple loosestrife. You can see how tall that gets and shades out different things. Phragmites, this one's been interesting because I drive on Highway 24 quite a bit, and I just keep an eye out for them because it seems like in some areas there are no Phragmites, but in other areas there are only cattails, but then there's some areas where it looks like the Phragmites are taking over the cattails. They are plants that are found typically in wet areas. Their dense thickets will shade out native plants. They can do chemical control, but you just have to be careful because they're in those wet areas not to be breaking any label codes as far as spraying into water, or if there's any native plants, you don't want to hit too many of those as well. Does a really good job of spreading. It can affect drainage if it gets too dense. So, and this is one that physical control is not a great option because they have rhizomes or underground stem structures that if you do chop those up or pull those out, they basically act like miniature plants that if they get chopped up but don't get removed, they have the ability to regenerate and start new plants. And there's the seed head there. And here you've got a field of them going. Reed canary grass. I'm gonna go ahead and skip this one because I think we're running a little low on time. And then Japanese knotweed is another one, but I want to get to garlic mustard. This is one that's going to invade the floors of different wooded areas. It really likes the shade, so it alters the understory habitat. And that's kind of the big one, is we want that understory to be healthy enough to support new saplings of native species. Garlic mustard kind of robs those native species of that. A lot of times people will control this by pulling it in the spring. However, if you do decide to do a herbicide, you just have to be careful because usually this is so widespread that you're going to have a there's going to be that chance of hitting the native species. So just be careful with it. And then if you do, if there's already seeds on the plant, you really need to try to dispose of the plant and the seeds off site, and try to get rid of those and get them out of the environment, just so that that seed bank doesn't get rejuvenated. So here you can see the seeds have kind of set, the flowers are going, real nuisance, and it just takes over the entire canopy there. So I'm gonna skip this boxwood blight. This is a fungal disease. If you have boxwoods, this might be something that affects it. This is something we didn't really see a whole lot. It spreads, it just does a real good job of nicking, whoops, I'll go back. Of spreading from infected plants to another. So, and even in like different water splashing. So there are different fungicides you can use, and there are resistant varieties. I just know that this is something that I've had to deal with in the past, and it does spread pretty quickly. And I'm gonna keep chugging along. Here's one of the invasives we see in the lake setting, the Eurasian water milfoil. Submerged aquatic plant, impairs recreation, so boat and swimming, different recreation things, and it reduces the fish and wildlife habitat. So you really want to prevent the spread, and there are chemicals used to control this. But I also want to remind folks that preventing spread also includes sanitation. So that means cleaning off the bottom of your boats. If you're a fisherman who's driving through this, you want to, check your propeller, check your prop, make sure that all this is cleaned off of it, because you really don't want to spread this from different water source to water source. I'm going to skip this one. All right, so I want to just touch on potential invasion. So of the many things we've had to worry about in 2020, there were some issues with seeds that were unsolicited, that were unknown species. They were sent to people who did not order seeds, but they were also sent to people who did order seeds, but they weren't part of the original order. So as far as my county is concerned in Wabash, if anyone had any unsolicited seeds, I had them bring them in. And I don't know if any other educators have stories, but I had 3 different instances where people brought in seeds. One of the packets contained what looked like beans and tomato seeds. The other one looked like maybe a grass seed. But there was quite what I would say an impressive response. I'm really appreciative of Purdue. If anyone does have these seeds that showed up, I've got here, it's the state plant health director, their mailing address. They do not want people to throw these seeds away or plant them, because what we've learned in the past 30, 40, 50 years is that invasives do a really good job of, causing problems. So to send them to a controlled site, they'll take a look at them, and then they will destroy them in a way that they're not going to spread. But yeah, this was kind of our big ag issue. Haven't heard too much about it. I'm going to get an update on this later today. So if anyone has questions about this, bring them to our next week's session for our Ask the Educator, because I'll have more information, kind of what folks have seen. So that's just something that's been interesting. And again, I was real happy that of all things that happened this year, there was a really good response. And I think we had a plan of action within, 48 hours. So that worked out really well. Here's some more additional resources. Stephanie or Krista or Adam, whoever, I can get this to you so we can copy this when we send out the survey. All of these are great links, just areas that have information, pictures, what's considered an invasive species by the DNR. And then I threw on this bottom bit, the Upper Wabash Invasive Network. So this has been a fun little club that I've been part of, that, we actually went out to the Salamone, and the weeds of choice, we decided we were looking for any honeysuckle or Russian olive. And we just had about 40, 50 people and went out and we did a real good job. They had herbicides and PPE, or personal protective equipment, for everyone, and we just kind of went out and took care of some of the trails and stuff. They got a lot of work done in a little amount of time, so there is stuff like that going on, and it just kind of makes for good clearing of some of that stuff to try to keep some of those areas we want to keep nice, nice for the foreseeable future. So, and then here we have reporting of the invasive species information from Purdue University. So that's at this website at the bottom, the agpurdue.edu /report invasive. Again, I can get that to you guys on the email for the survey. And then this is early detection. So, you know, if you see anything or distribution maps, you can click on plants, insects, diseases, and wildlife. So, you know, not just plants, which is what we talked about, but if there's any insects or things like that, this would be a great website to look at on a rainy day to just kind of figure out, you know, well, what do I have that's invasive and what don't I have, to make sure you're kind of following those guidelines. And then the cooperative invasive species management area, it's good with outreach, training, and control efforts. You know, they want to make sure that they've got the most up-to-date information for each county. So that's just something that does a good job. And the education is a big one. I know we talked about a lot of species, but the biggest thing is to figure out, well, why is it an invasive in the first place? Why do we need to control it? And then maybe take a look at if we're planting anything, make sure we know, you know, what's going in the ground, making sure it's not going to be spread easily. And so we can kind of keep these invasives down to a minimum.
Hey, Jeff, we do have a few questions here, and looks like you are getting right to that. So the first question we have here in the chat box that hasn't necessarily been addressed, someone was talking about knotweed and whether or not we should fear that or begin preparing for it. I saw that ISU has been having problems with that. So that was just one of the questions and want to get your thoughts on that.
Was it knotweed?
Yeah, I'm assuming Japanese knotweed.
Okay, I haven't heard too much of that yet, but to keep an eye out for it would probably be the best. I haven't seen much of that in Wabash. I think the best thing we could say about that is to keep an eye out for it. If you do see it, whether you contact your county extension educator, or if you get a hold of the DNR, I would say the DNR does have a really good website, and because they're usually working with the state parks, they can do a little bit better job of scouting. So that's kind of what I'll say about that.
Got another question that just came into me here. Do the stores still sell invasive trees or plants? It's like our large box stores. This kind of goes back to the Cleveland pear example that was asked there. So last year in 2019, April, there was an article released from the Department of Natural Resources that was pretty much trying to persuade people not to buy any types of pears. There was a whole list of those. So she did say that that they do see that the Cleveland pear tree is still available at some box stores. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Anyone who's selling so if you have those lists of invasives found in Indiana, and if a greenhouse or big box store is selling those, that's something where there better be something on the plant label or something in its background that lets you know it's sterile. If I were to see that, I would probably question, you know, where they're coming from, what's going on here, because as we saw with the pears, the older varieties that were sterile were mixing with the new cultivars. So that would definitely need some investigation. It would have to say something about doesn't produce, like it would have to say doesn't produce fruits, or just something like that, because again, the information is out there. I think we've got a good handle on what is invasive, and you know, that knowledge should be enough to kind of get the red flags going if something like that were happening I'm sorry if that doesn't answer your question very well, but it's kind of a tough one.
Can I just add that there was the Invasive Plant Act? The problem is that some of those species were not included on that act. So if you look in at like the Bradford pear specifically, like they're still able to sell that at the large box stores. Unfortunately, there's a lot of money in it. And so when we try to get acts and laws passed, when there's businesses that are making a lot of money off of certain species, but sometimes they don't get included in those laws. So they are trying to work to where that would be included, but just for information there, you can see some of those items with no labels on them as being invasive at the box stores. So just really important to make sure that as all of us as gardeners and homeowners are making sure that we're planting things and we're doing our research before we're planting items.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, and I guess if a landscaper is pretty astute, I've known a couple of them to purposefully not get more pears because they've had the invasive species pop up on their property, and now they're having to take time out of their agendas to clear that out.
All right. There were some other questions that came up in the chat, but I was kind of typing some responses in as we were going along. So hopefully those address those questions. And I'm not seeing any others that are coming in here. So we are 7 minutes past the hour here. Any final questions? We got time for one more probably.
Can I just add, sorry, but one other resource that's a really good one to know about is the Indiana Native Plant and Wildflower Society. I actually think that they just changed their name, so I might be saying it wrong. But if you look up the Indiana Native Plant Society, great resource. They put out lots of publications like this one here, Landscaping with Plants Native to Indiana. We'll make sure that we send this out in the email, but even within here, it talks about, okay, are you looking for butterfly food? These are the plants that you would plant. Are you looking for bird habitat? Are you looking at a rain garden or even different, do you know you want color in winter time or in fall time, excuse me. So they put out so much good information. Just their website alone tells you where you can buy a lot of native plants. It tells you more information about different invasive plants. So I think you'll find great use by looking at their website, and we'll get that information to you.
The other thing I would kind of snowball off of that is if you're ever looking for plants or going to nurseries, a lot of times just kind of looking at a company, and if they have a history or if they have, where their seeds are from, try to find that backstory. The more in depth that those are, a little more, it turns out to be a little more trustworthy as opposed to say a big box store where you're not sure where something's coming. But yeah, that's what I've got to say about that. And then just a quick pitch on